I was recently looking at the last few verses of Joshua chapter 5. They're quite striking, so I'm taking them as the verses for today's thought for the day. Let me read those few verses. Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 15. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Let me briefly remind you where these verses fit into the narrative of the book of Joshua. God has prepared his people for their entry into the promised land. The unbelieving generation who failed to trust God to take them into the promised land immediately after their miraculous deliverance from slavery in Egypt 40 years earlier have all died out, all that is, except for Joshua and Caleb. God has prepared a new leader for his people, Joshua, who takes over from Moses. Joshua and the people have crossed over the river Jordan on dry land. Everything is ready for the conquest of the land to begin. So at the end of chapter 5, the people are camped near Jericho, and Joshua is surveying the ground. Jericho is the first challenge, the first battle that they must face, and Joshua needs to make the necessary preparations. But Joshua's plans need to be brought into line with God's plans. And that's what these few verses are telling us. Joshua looks up and sees a man standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. When we first read that, without already knowing how the account unfolds, we do not know if this individual is human or divine. But his sudden appearance and his description should make it clear that this is the Lord himself appearing to Joshua. This is not the only time that the Old Testament describes a divine figure in this way. Joshua asks his question, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" In Joshua's mind, the answer had to be the one or the other. This individual was either on their side or on the enemy's side. But the answer seems to do more to confuse the issue rather than clarify things. It's certainly not the answer that Joshua or we might be expecting. "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." In fact, of course, the answer puts things into the right perspective. The question is not whether this commander was on Israel's side or the enemy's side. Rather, the real question was, will Israel be on the Lord's side? And it makes sense, doesn't it? If this individual is the commander of the army of the Lord, he is the one in charge, not Joshua. What is really impressive in the short passage is the way Joshua immediately responds in the right way to what the commander has said. He falls on his face to the earth and worships, and he says, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" As I said a moment ago, the real question was, will Israel be on the Lord's side? Will they join the Lord's army? There's a bit of an echo here of what happened when Moses met with God at the burning bush. Do you remember what God said to Moses then? It was more or less what he says to Joshua here. "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy." And that reminds us that God has graciously brought the people into a covenant relationship with himself. They are his people. He has made them his people. So that implies another question. Will the people follow the Lord and obey his commands? What lies ahead for Joshua and the people is not a matter of them following their own agenda. What lies ahead is God's plan for his people. And the first lesson, the most important lesson, is that they must live under his orders and obey all that he tells them to do. This same lesson applies to God's people now. We're to live as the Lord's obedient people. Jesus said in the upper room, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." John chapter 14, verse 15. Both Old and New Testaments tell us loudly and clearly that all our plans, all our actions, all our words must be brought to submission to our Lord and Master, who died for us and rose again. He says today, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments."